The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the narrow canyon, turning the rocky walls into deep shades of orange and brown. Jacob, a lone cowboy, rode slowly along the dusty trail, his horse's hooves kicking up small clouds of dirt. The wind carried the smell of dry sage and the faint, distant sound of a river flowing somewhere below. Jacob had traveled this route many times before, but today, something felt different. There was an uneasy stillness in the air, a quiet tension that made him keep a hand on the reins, and his eyes scanning every rock and crevice. He had been on his own for weeks, moving from one town to another, taking odd jobs, hunting for food, and delivering messages for settlers. Jacob had grown used to being alone. Life on the frontier was not kind to those who depended on others. He had learned early that trust was earned slowly, and that one wrong move could cost a man his life. Still, he carried a quiet hope in his heart, a desire to find connection in a world that often seemed empty and harsh. As Jacob rounded a bend, he heard a sudden rustle behind a large boulder. His horse startled, rearing slightly, and Jacob instinctively reached for his gun. "Who's there?" he called, his voice steady but tense. A figure emerged from the shadows, moving carefully but quickly. It was a woman, alone, dressed in traditional Apache clothing, her long dark hair tied loosely behind her head. Her eyes were wide with fear, and her hands were raised in a gesture of surrender. "Don't shoot, cowboy," she cried, her voice trembling but urgent. "If you spare me, I'll give you a family." Jacob froze. The words were unexpected, strange, and somehow compelling. He had faced many dangers in his life, bandits, wild animals, and hostile encounters with soldiers, but he had never met anyone who spoke like this in the middle of the desert. The woman's eyes held something he couldn't ignore. A mix of fear, honesty, and a quiet desperation that seemed to reach straight into his heart. "Who are you? What do you mean, give me a family?" Jacob asked cautiously, keeping his gun lowered but still ready. "My name is Nayeli," the woman said, her voice shaking. "I am from the Apache tribe. My family, my people, we were attacked. I was separated from them. I have no one now. If you let me live, I will stay with you. I will help you. And I will be your family." Jacob studied her for a long moment. He had heard stories of conflicts between settlers and Native Americans, tales of raids and reprisals that left towns and families in ruins. His instincts told him to be cautious, to keep his distance, to consider the danger. Yet, something in Nayeli's words, in the honesty of her gaze, made him pause. He realized that this was not a trick, not an attempt to deceive him. She was genuinely desperate, vulnerable, and alone. He lowered his gun slowly. "All right," he said. "I won't hurt you. But you have to trust me, Nayeli. One wrong move, and I can't promise what will happen." Nayeli nodded quickly, relief flooding her face. "I trust you," she said simply. "I have no other choice. Please, I just want to live." The sun dipped lower, casting the canyon in a soft golden glow. Jacob guided his horse closer to a small cluster of rocks, where they could rest without being seen from the main trail. They sat in silence for a while, each unsure of what to say first. Finally, Nayeli began to speak, her voice quiet but steady. "I come from a small village," she said. "We lived near the mountains, hunting, gathering, and living together. My family, my parents, my brother, they were all taken. I managed to escape, but I have wandered alone ever since." Jacob listened carefully, nodding. "I know what it's like to be alone," he said. "I've been riding alone for years, moving from one town to another. Life doesn't make it easy to stay with people. You trust someone, and something always happens. Either they leave, or the world takes them away." Nayeli looked at him, eyes reflecting a mixture of sadness and understanding. "Then maybe we can help each other," she said. "You have been alone. I have been alone. Perhaps together we can survive. The hours passed slowly. They shared small pieces of food, and Jacob taught Nayeli how to identify safe water sources, while she told him about edible plants and herbs that could be used for medicine. It was remarkable how much knowledge she had about the land. She could track animals, find shelter, and even predict changes in the weather. Jacob realized that she was not only brave but also incredibly resourceful. By the time the moon rose above the canyon, their trust had deepened. Jacob felt a strange sense of responsibility for Nayeli, a protective instinct he had not expected to feel. He knew that the journey ahead would be difficult. The land was harsh, and dangers lurked around every bend: bandits, wild animals, and the possibility of being caught in the conflict between settlers and Native Americans. Yet, he also felt that meeting Nayeli was not a coincidence. Somehow, their paths had crossed for a reason. That night, under the light of the moon, they built a small fire. Nayeli sang a quiet song from her childhood, a melody filled with longing, hope, and sorrow. Jacob listened, feeling the weight of the world and yet a sense of calm he hadn't known in years. He realized that her presence, her courage, and her determination had already changed him. He wasn't alone anymore. The next morning, they continued their journey. Jacob led the way through the rocky terrain, while Nayeli followed, occasionally pointing out hidden paths or warning of unstable ground. They traveled in silence for stretches, conserving energy and keeping a low profile. Jacob noticed that despite her fear, Nayeli's spirit remained strong. She moved with grace and alertness, always aware of her surroundings, yet never letting fear control her. During the journey, Jacob asked her more about her past, about her people, and about the traditions she had grown up with. Nayeli spoke of the Apache way of life, the importance of family, respect for nature, and the wisdom passed down through generations. She told him stories of bravery, survival, and compassion, showing that even in hardship, there was beauty and strength. Jacob shared his own stories too, about life on the frontier, the struggles he had faced, and the loneliness he had endured. They laughed at small things, like a mischievous coyote that tried to steal their supplies, and they mourned together for the losses they had each suffered. Slowly, the bond between them grew stronger. It was not love, at least not yet, but a connection forged through shared hardship, trust, and the promise of survival. By the end of the first week, they had established a rhythm. Jacob protected Nayeli from immediate dangers, while Nayeli's knowledge of the land ensured they avoided traps, found food, and stayed safe. They were no longer strangers. They were companions navigating the vast, unpredictable frontier together. As the sun set on the 7th day, Jacob looked at Nayeli and said, "You were right. If I had not spared you, I would have missed something important. You are part of my life now, whether I like it or not." Nayeli smiled softly, her eyes reflecting gratitude and relief. "And you are part of mine," she replied. "Together, we can survive. We can find a way to live in this world without fear." That night, as they settled by a fire under the stars, Jacob realized that the simple act of lowering his gun had changed everything. A chance encounter in a canyon had led to trust, companionship, and the beginning of a new chapter in both their lives. The words that had saved Nayeli's life echoed in his mind. "If you spare me, I'll give you a family." He understood now that family was not just about blood or tradition. It was about trust, care, and the willingness to stand by someone in the face of danger. And in that quiet canyon, surrounded by the vast wilderness, Jacob and Nayeli began to create a new kind of family. One built on courage, understanding, and the hope that even in a harsh world, kindness and connection could prevail. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine and earth from the canyon floor. Jacob and Nayeli rose early, their fire reduced to glowing embers, and prepared for another day on the trail. They had agreed to travel slowly, carefully, and to remain alert, knowing that the frontier held dangers at every turn. Jacob mounted his horse first, offering a hand to Nayeli, who climbed up with practiced ease. Though she was smaller in stature, her strength and agility were remarkable, the result of a life spent surviving in the wilderness. As they rode, Jacob noticed that Nayeli's gaze was constantly scanning the surroundings. Her instincts were sharp. She could sense movement in the shadows and hear the slightest noises over the wind. "You have an incredible sense of the land," Jacob said quietly. "I've traveled these trails for years, but I would have missed a lot without you." Nayeli smiled, a mix of pride and humility in her expression. "The land teaches you if you listen. You must pay attention to every sound, every scent, and every change in the air. It is the difference between life and death." Their journey took them through narrow passes, across shallow streams, and over rocky ridges. Each step required care, each movement measured. The frontier was unforgiving. Once, as they crossed a small stream, Jacob slipped on a moss-covered rock, and Nayeli caught him with a firm grip, steadying him instantly. He looked at her with surprise, then gratitude. "I don't know what I would have done without you," he said. "You would have managed," Nayeli replied with a small laugh. "But it is better with two than one." Over the next few days, they shared stories and memories, filling the long hours with conversation. Nayeli spoke of her childhood in the village, the celebrations, the dances, and the simple joy of living close to nature. She spoke of her family, the loss she endured, and the strength it took to survive alone. Jacob, in turn, shared tales of his work as a rancher, the cattle drives, the loneliness of nights spent under the stars, and the quiet moments when he wondered if he would ever find someone to share his life with. One evening, as they made camp beside a gentle stream, Jacob noticed Nayeli studying the stars. "What are you looking at?" he asked. "The stars guide us," she said softly. "They have always guided my people. When you are lost, when the path is unclear, they help you find your way." Jacob watched her quietly. He had always relied on maps, compass, and experience, but there was something comforting in her words. It reminded him that there were ways to navigate life beyond the tools he knew. He realized that Nayeli's wisdom was not just about survival, it was about seeing the world with patience, understanding, and hope. As the weeks passed, they faced challenges that tested their endurance and courage. One afternoon, as they crossed a dense thicket, they were startled by the growl of a mountain lion. Jacob's heart raced, but Nayeli remained calm. She whispered instructions, guiding Jacob to move slowly, to remain low, and to make himself appear larger, while speaking in a steady voice. The mountain lion circled them, but Nayeli's calm presence and careful movements kept it at bay. Finally, it slunk back into the shadows, and both Jacob and Nayeli exhaled with relief. "That was close," Jacob said, shaking slightly. "It is always close," Nayeli replied. "But we can survive if we do not panic." Their journey was not just about physical survival. It was about learning to trust one another completely. Jacob had grown used to relying on his own strength and instincts, but Nayeli's presence showed him the power of collaboration, patience, and understanding. They learned each other's rhythms, the subtle signs of fatigue, hunger, and danger. Together, they became a team, navigating the wilderness with a shared determination to survive and protect one another. One morning, they reached the edge of a small settlement, a cluster of wooden buildings surrounded by fences and fields. Jacob had spent time here before, delivering supplies and messages, and he knew some of the townsfolk. As they approached, he explained Nayeli's situation carefully. "She is not a threat," he said to the first man they met. "She has helped me survive, and she can help you too. Give her a chance." And their amor. And their amor. And their fivity. The townsfolk were wary, some more curious than others. They had heard stories of conflict between settlers and Native Americans, and they were unsure how to react. But Nayeli's calm demeanor, knowledge of plants, and willingness to work quickly won their respect. She helped with small tasks, gathering herbs, tending to small gardens, and assisting with minor medical needs. People began to see her not as an outsider, but as someone who contributed to the community. Jacob and Nayeli continued to live on the outskirts of the settlement, slowly building a life together. They hunted and farmed, prepared meals, and shared evenings by the fire, talking about the day and planning for the next. Their bond deepened. What began as survival had grown into companionship and trust. They had found in each other something rare in the frontier, a sense of home and family. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Jacob and Nayeli sat by the fire, reflecting on their journey. "Do you remember what you said the first time we met?" Jacob asked, his voice quiet. Nayeli nodded. "If you spare me, I'll give you a family." "And you did," Jacob said. "Not just a family, but a partnership. Someone who understands, who watches your back, who shares the burden of life." Nayeli smiled, her eyes shining in the firelight. "And you gave me more than I ever imagined. You gave me safety, friendship, and hope. You gave me a chance to live." The settlement gradually became more accepting of their presence. Jacob and Nayeli were invited to help with community projects, and soon, others sought their advice on survival techniques, hunting, and the care of the land. They became respected figures in the area, known for their courage, knowledge, and fairness. Life was not without its hardships. Harsh winters, scarcity of food, and occasional disputes reminded them that the frontier was never forgiving. But they faced every challenge together, learning and growing stronger with each passing day. Jacob often thought about how one moment, lowering his gun, had led to this life. A single act of compassion had changed everything. Years passed, and their bond evolved into a deep, unspoken understanding. They celebrated small victories, a successful harvest, a newborn animal thriving on the farm, a neighbor who found help in a time of need. These moments, simple as they were, became the foundation of their shared life. Jacob and Nayeli had built a family not defined by blood alone, but by trust, care, and shared experiences. At night, when the wind whispered through the trees and the stars glimmered above, Jacob often thought back to that first moment in the canyon. He remembered the fear in Nayeli's eyes, the sincerity of her plea, and the courage it took for her to trust him. And he understood that family, in its truest sense, was not only about survival, it was about connection, understanding, and the willingness to stand together through life's challenges. Their story became known throughout the surrounding towns. Travelers would speak of the cowboy and the Apache woman who had survived the wilderness together, who had built a life through trust and compassion. Their tale was one of hope, courage, and the power of choosing kindness even in a harsh and unforgiving world. Jacob and Nayeli had discovered that true strength was not measured in weapons or survival skills alone, but in the ability to care for another, to stand by them in danger, and to share life fully. Their family was not large, but it was strong, resilient, and enduring, a testament to the power of trust, empathy, and human connection. In the quiet moments, as they watched the sun rise over the mountains, Jacob often turned to Nayeli and said, "You were right. Sparing you gave me everything I never knew I needed." Nayeli would smile, her gaze meeting his, and reply, "And you were right to trust me." Together, we found something the world cannot take away. We found family. And so, amidst the challenges of the frontier, Jacob and Nayeli built a life filled with resilience, hope, and the quiet joy of shared survival. Their journey had begun with a desperate plea, but it had grown into a story of partnership, trust, and the enduring power of human connection. A story that would be remembered and told for generations as a shining example of courage, compassion, and the unexpected ways life can bring people together.